Professor Logan.
Am I supposed to go now?
Yes, sir.
Well, I've been given the honor of making a few brief comments before the symposium begins on the recent passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I'll just start with a quick observation, which I think is probably, in the end, for this group, the most important one, which is when I went to law school, one woman teacher, about a quarter of my class were women. And now when our students at Roger Williams look out at the podiums and the classrooms, the majority of our faculty are women and the majority of our students are women. And that is, to me, perhaps the best testament to the impact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had on the legal profession. Many judges write great opinions. Many judges serve long and distinguished careers helping make this a better America. But she really changed things on the ground, and she changed things on the ground for legal education, which is where I've spent most of my career. And so as we mourn her passing and honor her memory, I've been asked to make these comments and to ask us all to share 30 seconds or so of silence in memory of the passing of a truly iconic and great American. Thank you. And now I turn over to the esteemed hands of one of my favorite students in recent years, Dr. Aurora Paradises, and a first ever program on Latinx contributions to the legal profession and society. Take it away, Kim.
Thank you very much, Professor Logan. Again, welcome to the Latinx Contributions in the Law Symposium. If you have any questions, for those of you viewing, please type them in the Q&A and we'll address them at the end. As a law school community, albeit with heavy hearts, we persevere in advocacy and the fight for justice. This afternoon, amid difficult and for many uncertain times, we celebrate National Hispanic Heritage Month to place a spotlight on heroes that too often are unsung after providing leadership and the solutions to navigate unprecedented times such as these. To that end, I'd like to warmly welcome our first esteemed guests. Mr. Stephen Cordero is a partner and litigator at the New York law firm Ackerman LLP. He focuses his practice on commercial litigation in federal and state courts, mediation, and arbitrations. Mr. Cordero defends and prosecutes on behalf of a wide range of clients, including law firms and businesses, in actions pertaining to commercial, professional liability, insurance, real estate, and employment disputes. Stephen's practice is further strengthened by his experiences in patent, contract, securities, environmental, immigration, and real property law. Stephen is a former combat engineer for the U.S. Army and is a current president of the he is the president-elect of the New York Puerto Rican Bar Association. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Aurora. It's great to be here, and it's an honor to be as a co-moderator with these fantastic panelists and for this program. And let me have the honor to introduce them. First, and my bottom left is Eda Santiago. Ms. Santiago is currently a staff attorney at the Legal Aid Society's Harlem Community Law Office, where she represents tenants in eviction proceedings and leads tenants' rights community workshops. During COVID-19, she has appeared on Univision 41, Telemundo 47, and Spectrum and en Español, informing about tenants' rights and the eviction crisis. Eda's law experiences include representing major lending institutions in real estate transactions at one of the top law firms in the country in the real estate finance group. She has also advised clients on international tax and estate planning matters. In 2015, my very own Puerto Rican Bar Association New York named Etta as a Flor de Maga, a Young Associate Award honoree, and the Hispanic Coalition of New York recognized her as one of the 40 under 40 Latina rising stars. In 2019, Etta was awarded a 5-borough future fellowship launched by the Arena Summit for the New York City's emerging civic leaders. Etta will receive the 2020 Top Latinx Leaders Award from the Prospanica, New York on October 15th. She serves on the board of the Manhattan Community Board 12 and the Neighborhood Advisory Board, and is on the New York Junior League's Advocate for Public Advocacy Committee. Welcome, Ada.
Thank you. Gracias, Stephen. It is such an honor to be here, to be with my fellow panelists, and I look forward to a very stimulating conversation. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Next is up on my top left is Elke Tria, is a corporate attorney at Sullivan & Worcester, LLP's Boston office. Elke focuses her practice on mergers and acquisitions, private equity, emerging markets, general corporate matters, and opportunity zone investments. Prior to joining Sullivan & Worcester, she was a corporate associate at Morgan Lewis and Brokius and a senior M&A associate at Ernst & Young. Elke is a graduate of Boston University and Suffolk University Law School. Elke has been recognized by local and national organizations, including the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, the Hispanic National Bar Association, and Get Connected for her work and commitments to the recruitment, retention, and promotion of diverse attorneys. Welcome, Elke.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here.
Last but certainly not least is Natalia Varela. She's an associate counsel with Latino Justice ProDef, who focuses on a range of civil rights matters, including but not limited to employment issues faced by low-wage Latinx workers, education access for Latinx youth, government transparency, and challenges the use and effects of racial profiling, especially gang policing against Latinx youth. Natalia is a racial justice advocate who seeks the rebuilding of the institutions with an emphasis on equity, public health, and safety. Welcome, Natalia.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists, and a special thank you to Aurora for all the behind the scene work. It's been already a pleasure. So very excited for today.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, off to Aurora.
All right, so panelists, in the words of the American labor leader, community organizer, businessman, and Latino American Cesar Estrada Chavez, preservation of one's own culture does not require contempt or disrespect for other cultures. How can we reconcile this sentiment during a month dedicated to celebrating Hispanic heritage? And which Latinx heroes personally encourage you to celebrate your heritage, providing insight for your rationale? Elke, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I mean, such heavy, deep questions. Yeah, no, Hispanic Heritage Month, I think, is a really important opportunity for us to coalesce as folks who are here stateside. Especially as lawyers, I think we are a very small community. And so getting together to honor each other's commitment and accomplishments that we've had in our professional lives is just a wonderful thing we should do and continue to do. Someone that I always think of when I get really excited about being Latina and introducing myself that way and making sure everybody knows it is actually Celia Cruz. So I'm Puerto Rican, she's Cuban, and I always thought that she very much reminded me of my grandmother, so very flamboyant, very colorful. But in recent years, actually, there's some amazing children's stories written about her that I've had the fortune of reading to my daughter. And in those stories, it's a really powerful narrative about an Afro-Latina woman who comes stateside with, you know, very little, but being extremely gifted and talented and takes the world by storm. So though she's not a lawyer, and though there are many lawyers who make tremendous commitments, she's someone that really excites me and jazzes me up to be Latina, to be proud of being Latina, to share it with everybody I can, and who doesn't love a good salsero?
Azúcar, as she would say, right? Natalia, what are your thoughts?
I celebrate being Latinx every day, all the time. But I would say that for the month, I mean, it's always important to celebrate. I think, you know, the quote that you used from Cesar Chavez is perfect, right? celebrating one's heritage doesn't mean that you're undoing someone else's necessarily, unless you're promoting the denigration of someone else. And so I think that when I think of who inspired me, I mean, it's hard. I kind of have a yin and yang. For me, I would say I had to think of two. It would be Sylvia Rivera and Dolores Huertas. And I think really what is so inspiring about both, and I'll tell you why I have to pick two, because I think they both, you know, Dolores Huertas is about nonviolence and Sylvia Rivera has got a little bit more spunk going on. And so I think it's really important to highlight both in the community. And really their emphasis on intersectionality and how they took their different forms of their identities and promoted it all under a Latinx lens. And for the betterment of their community, and just went into some of the most marginalized places, and always had that every aspect of people's identity at the forefront. You know, I really appreciate Sylvia Rivera as an activist in the LGBT community, kind of pushing forward and also pushing against, even within the community, for trans rights, and saying that she wouldn't be left behind. And the way that she united with Miss Johnson, I just kind of think that sort of solidarity and push forward is so exemplary and important to Hispanic Heritage Month. And the same with Dolores Huertas, you know, farm workers, and really just pushing forward and not allowing her identity to be dissected, and pushing forward as a woman, pushing forward as economic advocate, is priceless to me, and really is inspirational. And I really try to hold true to their spirit when I think about, you know, different accolades that I try to achieve. So.
Understood. Eva.
Thank you for that question. And, you know, when I think of Hispanic heritage and being proud of my identity, I also agree that it's not about putting down any other identity. It's about celebrating the richness, the diversity that's part of who I am, right? I cannot, I am a Latina. Like there's no, I can't separate that. That's part of who I am. And I'm very proud of that. As far as our heroes, I mean, I certainly love Celia Cruz and, you know, Sylvia Rivera and Dolores Huerta, all people I've looked up to, and I admire the work they've done. But Aurora, or I'm sorry, Kim, when you opened, you talked about the unsung heroes. So for me, those are the heroes. And when I'm talking about the unsung heroes, personally, in my own family, people who, like my grandmother, she can't read or write. I have family members who didn't graduate from high school, and they all made a lot of sacrifices for the benefit of the family, right? It's in our culture, it's very individualistic. So one of the things that I appreciate about the Latina, the Hispanic culture, is about the focus on the family and la comunidad, the community. And those are my heroes, people who really stepped up to make sure that I can achieve the American dream. Like the American dream was them providing for me so I could become a lawyer, so I could pursue my own dreams. And I see that day in and day out. And as I got older with age, I've appreciated a lot more the sacrifices they made. And I see them more as heroes. Sometimes we use the word hero so loosely in our culture that it almost starts to lose its significance. And I'm like, wow, no, the older I get, the more I recognize everything they've done, and the more appreciative I am. So those, my dad, my grandmother, my mother, my whole family combined, they're my heroes.
Well said, Eva. Stephen, do you have something for the panelists?
Yes, and that was great. Before we get to the next section, a lot of it is for this month is about being seen, and that's the one thing important today, to actually be seen and understood, especially since they're supposed to, you know, we're going to be the largest ethnic group in this country within the next 30 years, and so we're going to have to define what that's going to be, and you know, that's actually thinking about that leads us into the next question. You know, the great Ralph Ellison wrote in The Invisible Man, quote, "When I discover who I am, I will be free." There's so much in the label to identity of who we are: Hispanic, Spanish, Latino, Latina, Latin American, now Latinx. For the panelists, if you tell us what those terms mean, terms are and what they mean to you. Choose. Let's go with who started off last time. Let's start off with Natalia.
Yeah, this is such a contentious topic, and actually something I spoke on recently. And I love how contentious it is. I don't shy away from it. But I will say that I'm a proponent of Latinx. The data out there and it's difficult because most of the work is I think that most of the work is driven by the community, and statistically, Latinx is not familiar in the community. And Latinx is also something that I hold dear as, a first generation person, because Latinx is not, that it depends on where you are in different Latin American countries, how that will be perceived. I can tell you even in our own office, it's a big source of contention. And I guess, some of the options I think you mentioned were Hispanic, Spanish. I shy away from using Hispanic and Spanish, though Hispanic is statistically, I think, the most used, just because it gives a little bit too much of an homage to our colonizers. And I don't like to be seen. I don't feel comfortable with being seen in that shadow, or that or that branding should be in that way. Latino, Latina, I shy away from it. I think I shy away from it not because there's necessarily something per se wrong with it, as much as that I think Latinx invites more inclusivity to people being able to identify differently when it comes up to their gender identity. And so it allows more options. And in English, I am a proponent of the use of they or them versus gender pronouns that identify as she or him. So I think that's really the main purpose of it. But with that said, no matter what, it's about how someone self-identifies and respecting that. So I think that's the number one. So when I work with clients who identify as Latino, it's very important for me to identify someone the way they want to be identified. And so if it's Hispanic, if it's Latino, then to each their own. But for me, it's really important to use Latinx to make sure that people feel like they can be included when it comes up to their gender identity. And if that opens a gateway for creating comfort, then I'm happy to have the conversation, and I'm happy to call anybody what they want.
All right, great. Etta?
I don't think I have anything more to add to those, to the terminologies. Latinx is, I think you'll see differences generationally. I mean, our generation is more open to using that term. And I think it's the right term to use, especially when we're trying to be inclusive. But when you have clients who are older, or even your own family members, there is that gap. There is that challenge, right? It's like, why are you changing my language? This is my language. And that's part of the controversy too. It's like you're almost Americanizing the Spanish language by adding this X and making it something different. Latin Romance languages, I mean, not just Spanish, French, we have other languages, Portuguese, are heavily gendered. I mean, that's just how the language is. So for a lot of people, it's almost like you're taking that away from them. However, when you're weighing the pros and cons, if it makes people feel more inclusive and we can celebrate how people are, meet them where they're at, then I think that that's the right term. Hispanic is the one I guess is used more frequently, like Hispanic Heritage Month. That's what we usually call it. And my understanding is that Hispanic, it has to do with speaking Spanish. So kind of going to what Natalia said, it is kind of connected, right, to the colonization, right? Because it has to do with the language, and the language came from Spain. Spanish, I rarely use it unless I'm actually talking about tapas or sangria or something like that that comes from Spain. And sometimes, unfortunately, I will see, you will talk to white Latinos who will say, well, I'm from Spain, I'm Spanish. I'm like, oh, okay. So sometimes that could also create a little bit of controversy, whereas some people want to identify more with Spain because they feel like that's a step up than being identified with a Latin American country, a country here in the Americas. So, I personally don't call unless you're really from Spain or Estapas, I'm not saying Spanish. In Latino and Latina, I usually do use Latina when I'm talking about myself. I mean, I do identify as a woman. I use she, her pronouns. And for me, Latina just, it feels more comfortable, and that's what I identify with. Yeah, I think that's all I have to add to that. I think that, you know, I'm happy to hear from Elke, like what she's heard about this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's a very contentious conversation, which I think is hilarious because it's only contentious among us, right? Like you'll meet South Americans and they'll be like, esa palabra no existe, Latinx, that's not a thing. Sorry, that's not proper Spanish. I don't care what you Americans do, da da da. For me, you know, and this is very much colored by the profession that I'm in and the circles that I'm in. And I think, you know, I definitely am very jealous of how many Latinos there are in New York City. And I suspect that Boston is kind of closer to what Rhode Island is as far as how many Latinos are around and in professional settings. There's just not. So for me, use whatever label you want that makes it crystal clear that you come from this background, whatever it is. And hopefully your colleagues and your mentors, you know, probe you a little bit and say like, oh, you know, Hispanic, is that a census term? Like, I love these conversations and I love the opportunity to educate people. Not that I have the answer, but you know, it's an ongoing conversation. You know, there's just not that many of us in the rooms that I'm in. So any label, pa que tú lo sepas, you know, we are here and we're working hard and we're part of these conversations.
Yes, and yeah, it's great. And it's about, and Natalia mentioned is, you know, we get to the opportunity, we think about a post-colonial world of where we can go on for the next decades, and of how these labels, we might even get a new one in a couple of years, and we don't even know. So we have to define exactly you know, for us to define who we are rather than having others put their labels on us. So Aurora, on the next question.
Yeah, I just want to say I totally concur with everything the panelists sort of had to offer. I do believe that there is a generational, you know, sort of interface with some of this terminology. Like Eda, I identify with Latina. However, like Natalia, I believe that Latinx is more inclusive. And so, you know, Elke, I love your sense of humor about it all because I sort of feel the same way. You know, it's sort of what you feel comfortable with and, you know, what, more importantly, what other people feel comfortable with and to respectfully address them in that way. So,
I did just want to add really quick that actually there's also another term that wasn't thrown out, but like Latine is more commonly used, I believe, in Latin America when it comes as an alternative to Latinx. And so Latine has been kind of thrown out there. And I actually had a conversation with a legal clinic, law students in the legal clinic recently, and they were asking about Latine quite a bit, and it was very lively. So I just wanted to throw it out there, give a shout out to Latine.
very good, very good. All right, panelists. So I'm going to challenge you a little bit to describe some of the challenges that you've experienced as a law practitioner because of your Hispanic heritage, and opine whether other Latinx lawyers have had similar experiences from your vantage point, presenting some possible solutions to the law community about how we can help implement or mitigate some solutions to those challenges. I'm going to go with, let's start with Eda. We haven't started with Eda, I don't think.
Fantastic question. And I think we need to start by acknowledging that not all Latinx people are the same. And if you look at me, you see obviously that I am a light-skinned Latina. So my challenges will be different than an Afro-Latina in the legal profession, even though to get started in the legal profession, the number of Latinx attorneys is still a small percentage of the total amount of attorneys. So that's the first challenge, right? Is that there's not that many of us. The second challenge is that even though the numbers are increasing and there's more Latinx going to law school and graduating, becoming lawyers, we still don't have that, our presence in the higher echelons of the legal field, whether judiciary, whether in a big law firms as partners, whether in higher government levels, we're still not there. So then there's an attrition rate, right? You graduate, but they're still not making it to that level. So that is always going to be a challenge because you don't have the people that are going to be able to help you navigate your legal your legal career, that are going to be able to give you that leg up when there's opportunities being presented. So that's a challenge, but I want us to be cognizant that these challenges are also very unique to Afro-Latinos, because when I walk into a room, especially because I started my legal experience at a big law firm, I was Latina. I was able to check the box. The law firm was able to check the boxes, but I look like a white girl, what people assume a white girl looks like. You know, that's it. They're like, oh, you don't look Puerto Rican. That's my background. I'm very proud of being Puerto Rican. I grew up in Puerto Rico, and people still like, oh, well, let me hear you speak Spanish. I don't believe it. So, but that alone, because there's colorism in the Latino culture, and this course colorism here in the United States. So there's an advantage of me looking the way I do and being able to be in spaces that is just not open to people that are darker skinned. So I just want us to be cognizant of that challenge. So now let's talk about the solutions, because you asked, okay, so what can we do? So I think the bar associations, and I'm giving a shout out to the Puerto Rican Bar Association. There's many other ones that really help build the pipeline, reaching out to students. And Latino Justice actually has a program también, which I'm a part of, a mentorship, and they also help them for LSAT prep. So that's step one, right? It's getting more Latinos, more Latinx students into law school, step one. Step two is making sure that once they're there, that's where the bar associations also come in with mentorship opportunities, with internships, with placing the Latinx students, giving them these opportunities. Because if you're not in the room, you're just not going to get the opportunities. So that's what they're there for. So that's step two. Step three is that after you graduate, is that you're still in those circles, that people are still not only mentoring, but sponsoring you, which is different. It means someone's speaking on your behalf. Someone's going to bat for you and saying, you know what, Etta would be a great judge, a great partner, whatever it is. And just having people in the room that are going to take that extra step, not just develop you professionally, but speak good about you and push you to give you those opportunities. So I think it takes some time, but the more attorneys we have and the more are moving on up, the importance is always to look back, right? Because I think unfortunately we do see, and this happens with women, with other attorneys of color, is because there's not that many of us, that sometimes we get to a certain position, we're like, well, it can only be one, it can only be two, so we don't look back. And I think that's a big challenge, is to change that mindset and to say, no, I'm going to look back. I'm going to make it easier for the next generation. Just because I went through some struggles doesn't mean the next generation has to struggle. Let's make it easier. Let's lift up more of us. And then that's going to help change just the environment, and everything. And I want to give the other panelists an opportunity also to speak about their experiences. But this is a topic that really gets me going, because sometimes, familia thinks, I graduated, I'm a lawyer, congrats, you made it. And then you're still in certain spaces where people still look down upon you because of your background.
Very well said, Eda. And I'd just like to say that Eda was my mentor over the summer doing an internship, and she is phenomenal, irrespective of the generational differences. She was not intimidated by me. I was not intimidated by her, and it was a great partnership. So thank you for that. Let's go with Elke.
Sure. Yeah. So this is probably the most important topic, I think, for any of us to be discussing and participating in. If you are in law school adjacent, you've graduated, you're interested in the legal, this is such an important topic, and nobody has the right answer for it. If any of us did, we would be on our own private island drinking margaritas by ourselves. We would be making a lot of money, because everybody is interested in this topic. For me, it's part one and part two. Part one is the law school situation, right? So a lot of Latinos just don't have access to the formula that is law school, and it is very much a formula. Many of us grew up in communities where If we were bright and diligent and interested, we did very well. And that carried us through our education, elementary school, high school, college, but law school is a formula. You take the LSAT, you get an excellent grade. If you don't get an excellent grade, you take it again, you take it again, you take it again to take the highest grade that you can. Same for your first year of classes. It's a formula, it just is. I often find that Latino law students that I mentor are totally outside of the headspace that they need to be in when it comes to taking the bar. And then they don't pass the bar. And it's not because they're not bright, and it's not because they shouldn't be in the profession. It's because they haven't had access to folks who have taken the bar, who understand that, no, you can't be working for these 3 months that you need to be studying to take the bar. Go live at home if you can. Don't take on any financial responsibilities. These are all things that are sort of embedded in our fabric of how we did it. We're always taking care of our parents. We're always, going to barbecues, helping people out. When you're studying for the bar, you can't do that. So that's part one. Part two is once you start working, as Adam mentioned, there is a retention and promotion problem. Of course, there's different focuses on this, like if you're in public interest or in nonprofit work, or if you're in the private sector in big law, judiciary and all that. But at the end of the day, Latinos are so poorly represented in the legal profession. And in fact, Latino lawyers are like zero. We are the lowest represented category in the legal profession, period. So there's big problems there. The way I think you get around it is really arming yourself and educating yourself about what you're getting into, right? Don't be surprised when you walk in the door and you're the only person of color, even if you're not Afro-Latino, or even if you don't identify that way, like you will be that token person in a lot of ways. Don't get upset by it. Go find your communities, go find your bar organizations, national, local, or otherwise. I think knowing that you're probably not going to have your community in your professional space is going to be something empowering to you to go out and get involved in other organizations. They don't even have to be legal organizations. They can be community involvement matters. They can be getting on, local boards of education, whatever inspires you, I think is really important. And sticking with it. Like I'm sorry, but it's not always the safest profession for people of color. It's not always a warm and welcoming place. I think our panelists can certainly attest to finding their home in the organizations that they work with currently, but I think a lot of times it's a really hard road for us. So the more you know, the more you educate yourself, and the more you build community and network outside of your professional realm, I think the stronger and more resilient you'll be, and then you'll stay in the profession.
That's great advice, Elke. Thank you. Natalia.
So, I guess like one of the big struggles is racism and like racial bias, colorism, as mentioned by Etta. I can't echo that enough. I hear you. And colorism within our own community. And then also like, I think about it in a way where there's also one, we talked about the lack of representation within the community, and it also leads to some forms of self-oppression as well, where you kind of you may want to hide, you may want to duck and go different ways, and that's very difficult when you pair that with what Elke was discussing about like lack of understanding of the formula that it is to be in the legal world, because when you're starting off, you don't really have a lot of people who can tell you what the game's supposed to be. And then on top of that, I think the way that I see it manifest the most too is speaking Spanish. Like, I know that there are law students out there and stuff, and something that frustrates me when I work with students is how much they tell me that their legal internships turn them into interpreters and translators. That's not what we're here for. We came here for a legal education, and because I can generate more business doesn't mean that you get to take advantage of my skill set. And you need to teach me the law, not teach me how to translate for you or interpret for you. So I think that that's a major one that like kind of also leads to something where you don't have that institutional background. I mean, this is what affirmative action is also about, right? And so there's not this institutional background that lets you understand whether you're interpreting for people or translating for people because you're a newbie and this is how you learn, versus if people are just using you in that format because they're accustomed to working with Latinos in that way. And so that's something that I think is a real challenge. And, you know, for a proponent of intersectionality as well as a Latina, also, you know, dealing with different forms of sexual harassment or, you know, people trying to make it seem like you are a hot item that is, you know, unique and rare and exotic and all those sorts of things. You know, it's happened in the courtrooms. It happens in one-off comments, you know, and that's also a real problem. So I think those are two of the bigger ones, but, you know, for me, they all fall under auspices of racism and racial bias.
Oh, I think that's very insightful. I mean, you have sort of the internal struggle or the imposter syndrome of I don't belong, and then you have those external sort of challenges with people trying to mold you into something that you were not meant to be, and not providing you, you know, the growth that you need within the profession. So very insightful, Natalia. Thank you very much for that. Stephen.
Yes, no, yes, that was great. And also to put it into context for the people who are joining us, only 4% of all attorneys in this country are Latino or Latinx. So you just think about all the attorneys out there, only 96 of us are not us. And so, but on the flip side, there's still more numbers going into law school. And for us who's in the profession, that you have an opportunity to connect. And there's one thing to not lose sight of. Last year I was out at a conference and it was full, and somebody during a luncheon mentioned everybody in the room was the Latinx conference was like, everybody who's first generation of going to college, please stand up. And 80% of us, including myself, you know, stood up. So you just think about us, the opportunities that we have and ability to connect with people on the panel and also in your community who are professionals, not necessarily lawyers, but other Latinx professionals is important for you and for the future. And also, but, you know, thinking about the future is one thing, of course, is whatever present, especially in the news of what was announced today is about, of course, COVID and how the impact on our communities. And me actually personally, I lost my father to COVID back in April. And so many other, you know, Latinx have actually succumbed to this awful disease. And here's a point for the panel. That was back in May when the death toll was rising in New England. The Boston Globe wrote an article called "Latinos Hit Hard by the Coronavirus Struggle to Bury Their Dead." And the Globe noted that the Latinx were not only diagnosed at a higher rate with COVID, we also had the highest unemployment rate during this crisis, and how that impacted us as a double-edged sword. So can you tell us, you know, what COVID-related challenges we face? And let me start off with Ellie.
Sure. I mean, there's so many to count, and I think so many more to come to fruition as we still get our arms around both the virus and then, you know, the economic trickle-down effects that have happened. I live in a community that is majority minority Hispanic, mostly Colombians. Specifically, like, the neighborhood that I live in was one of the highest rates of COVID in Massachusetts. So it's crazy. I'm sure similarly in New York, you know, it was just a total shutdown. As far as how that relates to the Latino community as a whole and sort of how we can help and be thoughtful in the legal profession, you know, I don't always know. I don't always know what the right way to contribute is. I think that checking in on people is really important. I think that, you know, donating in whatever way that you can is really important. I think that making sure that you're connected to your local civic engagement community. So in my area, we have lots of amazing nonprofits that are doing incredible work around housing. Even with the eviction moratorium, there's a lot of questions around sort of what people's rights are. Landlords are getting really pushy and aggressive, especially when they're dealing with folks that may be undocumented or just don't have the sophistication to kind of put their elbows up and say, yep, I've lawyered up, I have an attorney, you'll be receiving, you know, XYZ letter in the mail. And these days, I think it's really important for those of us in our profession, even like me, who I don't practice that type of work in my day-to-day life, but I think because I'm in the community and I'm part of the community, it's really important to offer any services that I can to the community, to the legal aid services that are actually doing that work. But I think it still remains to be seen how it affects our community. But I think we all need to be really vigilant and figure out ways to contribute our brain capital, our money, our, you know, our resources, whatever we have to throw at the table.
And Natalia?
You know, I think that a lot of the problems that come up with COVID, like if I'm going to say something concrete, it's like, you know, the lack of recognition of non-citizens within like any sort of relief packaging and such. But I mean, that's something very concrete and not really addressing the issue at hand, because this really just does exacerbate everything that's going on and really speaks to a failure of our general society's understanding of public health and what's necessary. And so when I think about this question, I guess I think about one of the biggest issues, the criminalization of the Latinx population that's been going on for not just this administration, but that's really been plastered on during this administration, with the rhetoric of dehumanizing the Latinx population, making it that much less desirable to address the need, or easier for people to look the other way, to feel like this isn't affecting potentially their community, and so, you know, it doesn't matter. But at that fundamental issue, it really is a lack of understanding of how public health works, and how we are all connected on that front. So I guess when I think about it, I just think about the criminalization of the Latinx community being the major issue, because it has, you know, that rhetoric has prevented people from coming forward, even when benefits are there within the state for testing. It has made people feel like they have to hide in the shadows. It's undercounted the actual effects of this disease within our population and within the Latinx community as well. And so when I think about it, I think about if I try to provide a solution, I don't think it's so small. It's more of something where this is a time where from the ashes something should build, and people should be rethinking models about what it means to address public health issues and crises, and that when we dehumanize any population, it allows for spread, right? It'll allow for spread because it allows people to think that it doesn't matter as much. You know, there have been articles even about, you know, the administration's response to COVID was a little bit more forceful at the beginning, but then when you saw who COVID-19 was killing and how fast it was spreading among the Black and Latinx community, that, you know, that's when we saw even more varying messaging from the administration. So I think that when I think about this, I think about it kind of goes back to the decriminalization of the Latinx community. And by that, I mean stopping assuming that this population doesn't matter and that everything and that all their actions are criminal. And by that, I mean also the immigration aspect of things, which is that, you know, being an immigrant is not to be illegal. And it's also, it's a huge factor in how people have tried to access help during this time. And so that rhetoric really trickled down during this pandemic, and I think caused a lot more harm. So that's kind of it in a open nutshell.
So as I was mentioned at the beginning, I'm at the Legal Aid Society, where I represent tenants who are facing eviction. So what did COVID-19 not do? COVID-19 did not cause these problems. Let's be very clear. It just shined a light on a lot of the issues that were already existing, and it made them worse for sure. So for instance, when we're talking about housing stability, prior to COVID-19, about 45% of the population in my community board district, which is the Washington Heights Inwood area of New York City, was already rent burden. Rent burden means that more than 30 to 35% of your income goes to rent. So people were already rent burdened prior to the pandemic. Once the pandemic hit and you have people losing their jobs, not able to work, losing hours, even if they were able to work, relying all of a sudden on maybe just one source of income as opposed to multiple people in the household. Now you have people paying 50 to 60 to potentially more of their income going toward rent. So we have a huge housing crisis. And so as Elke mentioned, there are moratoriums, and I've been talking a lot on the media about this and just trying to inform the community because there is a lot of misinformation, particularly as Natalia mentioned, when you're dealing with communities that are more vulnerable, undocumented people, people who maybe have a criminal background, they're just more vulnerable, and landlords do know this. So they try to take advantage, even with a moratorium, they try to evict people illegally. So during the height of the pandemic, I was dealing with more illegal lockouts. These are the type of proceedings when the landlord tries to take it in their own hands and evict someone without going through a judicial process. That didn't really happen, at least not in Manhattan prior to the pandemic. And all of a sudden we're seeing that because they know there are certain populations, certain families that are going to be terrified and they're going to take the landlord's word. It's like, oh, okay, I need to leave. And it's like, no, you're actually protected. Even if your immigration status is uncertain, like it does not matter. You're still protected. So COVID-19 really exacerbated the housing crisis that was already in existence in New York City. Tied with the housing crisis is food insecurity. So during this time, I've been volunteering a lot at food banks and helping people with groceries and whatnot. And I think that it is very shameful for New York City and for the country as a whole to be such a wealthy country and to have people going to bed hungry, to have children that do not have food. I find that really despicable. And tying it into this webinar, food insecurity and housing instability are public health issues. They really are. I mean, if children are not eating, they cannot perform well in school. If they cannot perform well in school, I mean, it just creates a host of other issues. If you don't have a stable house, we cannot talk about mental health or alcoholism or whatever other issues you have. If you do not have access to healthy, affordable food as well, then that's going to create other health issues as well. So it's really all tied in, and COVID-19 just really forced us to not be able to ignore it. I think for a long time, people just kind of go about their day, and unless it impacts you directly, you're just like, la-di-da-da, this is not an issue. This is an issue for like a very small percentage of people. But COVID-19 forced us first all indoors. So now we're consuming the media, consuming the news. We're like, oh, this is happening, and more people were impacted. Maybe people that before were just barely making ends meet, but they were able to pay their bills, all of a sudden were thrown off the cliff and are now just really insecure and not knowing whether they're going to have a home by January 1st when the new quote unquote moratorium expires in New York. And as far as food is concerned, I'll give you an example. I had a client that I helped in March, right before the pandemic, to discontinue her housing case. We got her on an ongoing subsidy, so she was good to go. A few months later, I'm volunteering at a food bank in Washington Heights, and I recognized her. It was that same woman. So you see, I was able to keep her in her home, but once again, food insecurity became the issue. And there she was waiting an hour in line just to get some whatever the nonprofit was willing to give them. So it's a big issue. It's a public health issue. This is not just the economy. The economy is not some invisible, made up thing. When I think of the economy, I tell people the economy is people. And people, people have to live, and people have, this is a health crisis. And to go to the administration, I have to use the administration here, the White House administration. They acknowledge that it's a public health crisis. You know how they did that? The CDC eviction moratorium, that because in order to be able to do that, they had to argue that they had jurisdiction over this matter, and that the CDC, which is typically a public health, is a public health agency, can announce an eviction moratorium because it's a public health crisis. If people are losing their homes, they end up in shelters where there's a greater likelihood of contacting COVID-19. or even if they're not going to shelters, if they have to go with their families into small apartments, so you have, instead of 4 people, now you have 8 people in an apartment, there's a greater likelihood of people getting COVID-19 and not being able to isolate. This idea of physically distancing or social distancing is a privilege for many people. It's a privilege that does not exist in our communities. So that's my spiel about housing, food insecurity, and public health.
Very well said. Phenomenal, Evan. I think now everybody knows why you're my mentor. But, you know, just to sort of speak a little bit to the immigration issue, in the 1980s, we had approaching 15 million Latin Americans in the United States. It is now 2020. That is up to approximating 60 million, so quadruple. Of that, 80% are American citizens. And so this immigration agenda, and that the remaining 20% are in the pipeline, many are in the pipeline somewhere toward naturalized citizenship. And so the immigration agenda is really obscuring a lot of the real issues, the public health issues that you've outlined. So thank you for highlighting that. I think at this time, if we have any questions, Rachel Townsend, our treasurer with the Health Law Society, you can go ahead and address those, Rachel.
Hi, Kim. So we have one question in the chat, and it says, I believe this is to all the panelists. In a country that is inherently favorable to white people, have you ever felt that having a non-white, Latina, or Spanish name has ever held you back in your career in any way?
Excellent question. Natalia is ready to go, so go ahead, Natalia.
You know I am. I would say yes, in the sense of just, you know, sometimes it doesn't have to be like, you know, oh, well, first off, more than likely yes, because of like studies that show that like Latino surnames are discriminated against for applications, or, you know, automatically different biases are implied by those last names. So there's stuff that we just don't know exactly when it happened to us, but statistically probably yes. I think the other aspect of it is like, you know, I've definitely had people use it as like an opener to other me and to just try to make me like that's the only part of me that's there. Like, oh, Varela, and like, you know, things like that. And also, of course, like I mentioned before, another form of sexual harassment too. Like, you know, different kind of things that just sort of really exoticizes it. And so it becomes a talking point as if it makes that me, like me as an entire person. So I think that holds you back in your career, because you, even in those subtle moments, you feel uncomfortable. And, you know, you can feel someone can make you feel really uncomfortable. And, you know, a big part of the attorney game is confidence, going in, not being rattled. And, you know, you can prepare all the time, but when you get hit with something that's about your identity, your race, your gender, it can shake you and it can make you uncomfortable in the space. And so, you know, you have to be prepared to, I often deal with it by how am I going to make this person feel the most uncomfortable? And I find, you know, how do I do this weird retributist, despite the fact that I'm an abolitionist, tit for tat in that moment, and sort of say, a lot of times I'll say like, you know, something like, what do you mean by that? And just ask someone to explain what they mean. And it's really interesting how much they get jilted by having to explain themselves, or, you know, or just kind of saying like, oh, okay, and do you understand what that means? Or just challenging someone by asking them to explain themselves, I think is really crucial. And it's important, I think, because it likely will come up from time to time, to be prepared with those quick responses. So that you're not spending so much time really focusing on like maybe some insecurity that has been brought out.
I would echo that. I mean, I can think of a million. So my name is not Hispanic at all, but I grew up with only Spanish speakers. So my name, I say el que, como el que. And as a kid, I stopped saying it like that when I wasn't around family members, and I used to call myself Elka. because it didn't bring up the fact that Americans have a hard time with those, you know, QUE sounds anyway. So by calling myself Elka, I didn't really have to engage or address the fact that there was some otherness about me. But I was working at EY, and I had this Latino partner who took me under his wing and mentored me, and he was like, "You gotta cut that crap out. That's not your name. And these are intelligent people, and you have to start saying your name the way that it is." And in that conversation, I switched. Literally, I think I was like 24, 25. And I started using the name that my parents gave me when I was born, which is hilarious. But you notice it really obviously, I think, when you see colleagues joining or more junior people joining the ranks, right? You'll have someone whose name is very clearly Luis, and they introduce themselves as Louis. Like, why are you doing that? It's just because they're trying to avoid a conversation. But I think it's really important for those of us who ping to that, you know, that are in tune, just pull them aside and be like, you don't need to do that. That's not who, you're not getting yourself ahead in any way. You're suppressing who you are. And that is going to come to bite you at some point down the road, because that's your identity, and you need to figure out how to wrap that into your professional sphere here.
That's great. Eva.
We could go on to the next question, because I think there's another question in the chat. So I think both Natalia and Elke did a great job answering that.
Okay.
So the next question in the chat, are there any specific courses or experiences that you would recommend to law students who will be following you in your practice of law?
I could start with that one.
Okay, Eva.
Okay. I would recommend writing courses. A lot of writing courses beyond just your 1L required writing course. Just keep writing for a few reasons. One, you need to develop that skill. As a lawyer, you're going to be doing more writing than you're going to be doing oral arguments. Everybody wants to do oral arguments. You take mock trial. It's so exciting. Everybody in your family tells you you're going to be a great lawyer because you argue so effectively. But can you argue it in writing? So you have to really develop that. So that's one. Two, you're going to need writing samples when you're applying for jobs. That you don't want your writing sample to be from your 1L first semester. Believe it or not, you will get much better by the time you come in your second semester 2L year, and then you're in your 3L year. So you want to have fresh writing samples that you can use when you're applying for jobs. So that's another reason. What other type of courses or experiences? I would also encourage you to take a class that maybe, especially if you think you know exactly what you want to do after you graduate law school, and maybe you're only taking classes that are aligned in that path. Sometimes you're not going to get that job right out of law school. And often you might realize that that's not what you really wanted to do. So I encourage you to use these 3 years to try a class that's something completely different. If you're very into public interest, take an additional like business or tax class. You never know. Or if you're really hardcore business, you have a business background, maybe do something that has to do with poverty in the law or something completely different. Challenge yourself. This is the time to do it. I know for me to say that law school is fun, maybe you're sitting right now thinking, no, it's not. I enjoyed law school. I enjoyed learning. And so use this opportunity, because once you graduate, you're going to be working a lot of hours. You're going to be maybe taking CLEs that are required and are not always fun. So this is an opportunity for you to really explore and enjoy yourself.
And that's great. I would also add, I don't know if Roger Williams has clinics, but I would definitely recommend a clinic if those are available to you. Any of the practical courses around doing actual client facing work. I think, your first year coursework is so important, but things that you can do that are sort of more practical in nature, where you're actually drafting, or you're actually, going to court, or you're doing intakes with clients. Those are really important. Something that we haven't really touched on yet is that we are it is a very unique time to be a law student right now. Though the 2008 recession was not that long ago, I think there's a lot to be learned from that period. I was a 2012 graduate, so one would think that things were better by then, but they certainly were not. I'm sure all my New York attorneys can talk to amazing layoffs that happened and the offers that were rescinded and how it really threw everyone into a tailspin. So I encourage you all, as that I mentioned, to try to be as diverse and flexible as you can, because though you may have a really strong interest in a particular area, this economy is not going to make it that easy for you. So I think it's really important to prepare yourself and have your toolkit so you're ready for a lot of different opportunities. You know, I did not see myself being a tax attorney, didn't see myself doing M&A, but those are the tax part, at least I have to say, is very recession proof. That's a topic that students, if you have a basic understanding of, you'd be a huge asset in a lot of areas. So definitely be flexible, and I think diverse, because, you know, unfortunately these types of recessions really do take a while to hit the legal profession, and they have long-term effects.
Well said. Natalia.
Yeah, I agree with Elke. And I agree with it. I would say that specifically what I agree with is doing diverse things. And I will say I've always been a one-track legal mind, in the sense that I either was going to do international human rights, or I was going to do what's known as civil rights, or some combination of it. And that's what I stuck to, and I was really happy with that. But no matter what, so I do employment law, right? You need to know all sides, so you need to know all sides. There's no reason not to take corporations. There's no reason not to take tax law. Taxes are for everybody, like I'm saying. Like, there's no reason not to do that. And it's good. It challenges you. And it's a different aspect, and you can use it for yourself. Don't forget, a lot of being a lawyer is just being like a more informed citizen. And so I think the truth is that, like, you definitely want to diversify in those trends, but at the same time, think about what you want to do. You could, if you do know what you want to do, then, like for me, I knew I was going to be down for trials. Like, I knew I was going to want to go to be a trial attorney. I wanted to do motion practice. That's my personality. I'm in there. But so go observe a trial. You know how long it takes for you to be able to actually go to trial, and how far away that is from law school. So, like, it's actually worth it to just go and observe sometimes. Sit in a trial when in your second year, third year, when you have a better understanding, and see, like, what does that look like? And maybe you'll turn around and say, I do not want to do that. And sometimes you'll say, I do want to do that. And maybe you want to be a transactional attorney, which is awesome. You know what I mean? I love getting down in the contracts. Like, it's great. You're in there, pens, hacking away. That's what I was doing all day today. I was working on this consent decree. And like, I think that the truth is like, you kind of want to start thinking about what your day looks like. And if you don't know what that means, then go and see what that looks like. Find a transactional attorney, see what their day is like, shadow people and get a feel for it. I also strongly encourage, and I know every law school does, so I'm sorry, but I'm going to echo it. Go work for a judge, even if it's state judge. You can go in and work, do a semester, see if you can get a placement or an externship, so you see what the courtroom's like, and also so you have consideration if you are going to be before a judge, what that looks like and what they want from you, and how to get it to them as quickly as possible, because they're the ones who are making decisions, and you need to know what they like for their decision-making process. So that's kind of what I think about.
I think that's all. Yeah. Thank you so much, Natalia. I think that's all great advice. We're over time, and so I want to respect everybody's time. But Stephen, if you had a final thought, now is the time.
Thank you. The only thing is, for all the students who are attending, is if you want to do something, go for it. Now, a lot of times we might get pigeonholed, or somebody else will tell us to do a certain way or go a certain path. If you want to go it, just do it. You have the opportunities, especially different things of which Algie was talking about, and Natalia, and go for it. And don't let somebody else tell you what you can or can't do.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen. As I said, we're over time. I feel like I can speak to you all for another 3 hours, but we just don't have that time. If there are any follow-up questions for any of the attendees, please forward them to hls@g.rwu.edu, and we'll make sure that we get those questions answered. Panelists, you're phenomenal. That's why you were chosen. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I also would be remiss if I didn't thank my team at the Health Law Society, as well as the other student organizations that were involved in co-sponsoring this event. The Criminal Law Society, the LGBTQ+ Alliance, LLSA, MCLSA, that's the Latino Law Student Association, the Multicultural Law Student Association, the OWLs, the Older, Wiser Law Students, or so we think, and the Women's Law Society. I also want to extend a very special thank you to Lori Barron and the entire team at the Feinstein Center for Pro Bono and Experiential Education. I know there was a question related to whether or not we have clinics. We absolutely do. This is the team at RWU Law. They're the public interest hub and home base for externships, the Pro Bono Experiential Learning Requirement, and the Pro Bono Collaborative. The Feinstein Center for Pro Bono and Experiential Education provides students with real-world experience for workplace readiness upon graduation. And through the Feinstein Center, students can participate in externships locally, across the country, and even abroad. We call Lori Barron our fairy godmother. If you want it, she'll make it happen for you. And so in terms of other thank yous, I have to definitely thank the Puerto Rican Bar Association of New York, Stephen Cordero, who is the president-elect, for being one of our champions, the Hispanic National Bar Association. We also want to thank the Latino Policy Institute at Roger Williams University, and the Dispute Resolution Center at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, the Honorable Dione Garcia. I know he doesn't like to own it. You're owning it this month, sir. And also Professor C.J. Ryan, who is our faculty advisor at the Health Law Society. We also have to thank Jason Clark, Assistant Attorney General of the New York State Attorney General's Office and immediate past president of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. Jose Perez, of course, Deputy General Counsel, Latino Justice. Also, last but certainly not least, Roberto G. Lebron, AAG in charge of the Harlem Regional Office of the New York State Attorney General. If I missed anybody, I'm sorry. I love you. Azúcar, happy and healthy National Hispanic Heritage Month. Enjoy. Make sure you engage in self-care, and thank you for joining us this evening. Have a good one, everybody. Thank you.